When he called, I almost didn't answer. His name lit up my screen the way a wild idea flashes through your mind, bright, tempting, but full of warning signs. It was nearly midnight. The city outside my window hummed softly. 1,000 distant conversations blending into one long breath. I could see my own reflection in the glass, uncertain eyes, half-tied hair. A sweater pulled a little too tight. Don't pick up, I told myself. You'll regret it, but I did anyway. His voice came low, steady, careful. Are you awake? Barely. There's something I want to show you, he said. Silence pressed through the phone before he added, you'll have to trust me. It's safe, trust, the shortest word with the longest consequences. Now? I asked. Now, he repeated. I looked out the window again. The moon was pale and thin, a shy witness. 5 minutes later I was out the door. Stepping into cool air that smelled faintly of rain, he met me near the old river bridge. No one really came here at night anymore. Streetlights sputtered but kept enough glow to turn the water below a dull silver. When I walked closer, I finally saw what he'd set up, a small folding table to thermoses. A lantern glowing a soft amber. It looked simple, harmless, almost sweet. But something in my chest was still tight with doubt. I know this looks strange, he said, sensing my hesitation. But trust me, there's a reason. I crossed my arms. Do I get to ask questions? Eventually, he smiled. Sit, just listen. I sat. The metal chair was cold enough to make me shiver. He poured tea into 2 cups, steam curling through the night air like whispered shapes. We didn't speak for a moment. I sipped slowly. The warmth reached my fingers first, then my nerves. Finally, he said, you always told me fear means don't do it. Usually, he watched the river as he spoke. What if sometimes fear just means it matters? The simplicity of that idea startled me. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small sealed envelope. My name was written on it. What's this? I asked, something I found while clearing my grandfather's place. You might want to see it. My eyebrows pulled together. Why me? Because it mentions your family, he said. I tore the top carefully. Inside was an old photograph, 2 men standing outside a lakeside cabin. One of them unmistakably my grandfather, decades younger. Behind them, faintly visible, a third figure leaning in the doorway. A woman who looked exactly like me. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. That's impossible, I whispered. He nodded. I thought so too. The photo was dated long before I was born. I wanted to show you the cabin, he said quietly. It's still there. I drove by earlier to be sure. Fear resurfaced, its familiar claws testing my resolve. Now, I asked again. He nodded. If we leave now, we'll make it before sunrise. Everything rational in me screamed no. But curiosity, that old betrayer, won again. Fine, I said, surprising myself. Let's go. The drive took an hour. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches knitting overhead like a ceiling of shadow. The radio stayed silent. Every so often, he'd glance my way to check if I was still okay. By the time we reached the cabin, dawn had begun to trade night's blue for gray. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. It looked nearly identical to the photo, wood faded, roof sagging, shutters crooked. Yet it stood, defiant, waiting. We stepped onto the porch. My pulse drummed against my ribs. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside, dust floated through sunlight in lazy patterns. It didn't look haunted, just paused, like someone had stepped out decades ago and never came back. We searched carefully, opening drawers, brushing dust from shelves. In the small main room, an old phonograph sat silent. Next to it, a single ledger book. I opened it. Pages filled with looping handwriting, some in ink too faded to read. Midway through, a page headed simply, for her. Beneath it, she'll find this when she stops running. Tell her the river remembers. My throat tightened. I turned the book toward him. What does that mean? He studied it quietly, then said, there's a river behind the cabin. We stepped out the back door. Fog rolled low over the water. A small wooden dock stretched half broken into the current. Something glinted near the shore, a tin box half buried in wet sand. Together, we pulled it free. Inside was a folded note sealed in plastic. The ink had bled a little, but the words were still clear. If you're reading this, you share my face. Don't fear what you don't understand. Fear keeps us safe, but it also keeps us small. You'll know when to let it go. I had no idea who she was, ancestor, look-alike. Something else entirely, but the message felt like it had been waiting just for me. He stood quietly beside me as I reread it. When I finally looked up, my fear was still there, but it was softer now. No longer barricading me, just standing at the edge. Ready to be transformed, we sat at the dock. Feet brushing ripples, the world slowly waking around us. A heron moved through the mist, wings catching pale light. So, he said gently, was it worth the fear? I laughed under my breath. Ask me again when my heart stops racing. He smiled but didn't press. We listened to the river instead, the way it lapped against the wood, steady and unbothered. Carrying decades quietly forward. Sometimes a story doesn't need a full explanation. Sometimes just learning that mystery exists and that we're part of it is enough. The drive back felt shorter. Maybe because my thoughts weren't shouting anymore. I kept glancing at the photo on my lap, the one now bound between reality and legend, and felt something shift inside. When we reached the city, morning had bloomed fully. Streets glistened under new light. Before I stepped out of the car, he said, "I'm glad you said yes." "Me too," I answered. And I meant it. Later that day, as I pinned the photograph to my corkboard beside other fragments of life, I realized how rare it is to feel a before and after so clearly. All it took was one wrong-timed call, one hesitant yes, and one night that began in fear but ended in understanding. Maybe that's what growth really is. Not the disappearance of fear, but the moment you decide to walk through it and see what else might be waiting. And that's why, whenever someone asks about that night, I smile, because I remember the cold air, the unknown road, the river's voice, and I remember thinking I was terrified. But it became the best experience of my life. We didn't rush back right away. For a while we just stood there by the water, holding the note between us as dawn tried to break through the fog. The world around seemed to breathe with us, quieter, slower, certain that something had changed even if it couldn't name what. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the tin box. "You know," he said softly, "it's strange how fear makes us feel safe. Like as long as we keep being scared, nothing worse will happen." I nodded. "And then you realize the fear was the thing keeping you small." He smiled, small and knowing. And for the first time that night, the silence between us felt calm instead of heavy. We sat down on the dock, feet dangling just above the water. Ripples spread out from where our shoes barely touched. The air smelled of pine and wild mint. Every sound, birds waking, current shifting, felt sharper, clearer, more real than it had the night before. "So," he said after a while, "was it worth it? The fear?" I laughed under my breath. "Ask me again when my heart stops racing." He didn't push for an answer. We sat a long time like that, watching the sun climb and color the cabin in soft gold. When I finally exhaled completely, it was like something older than me left with the breath. All the hesitations, the second guessing, the what ifs, the drive home felt lighter. The trees no longer looked like sentinels but companions guiding us back. And though we barely spoke, the kind of silence we shared was the kind that means connection, not distance. Back in the city, everything looked the same, but I wasn't. It's strange how quickly a single night can change the measure of fear. When I pinned the photograph to my corkboard later that afternoon, I realized I'd stopped looking at it like proof of something impossible. It was a message that curiosity had been right all along. That life isn't about avoiding the unknown but meeting it carefully, with eyes open, heart half ready, and courage trembling but present. Now, whenever I think about that night, I remember the cold air, the quiet river, the letter that seemed to find me through time. More than anything, I remember how I almost said no, and how if I had, I would never have known what it feels like when fear turns into wonder. That's what makes it the best experience of my life, not because it was easy, but because I learned that bravery doesn't erase fear. It just teaches you to walk beside it.